Hello, my name is Monica Hockenbrock, and I will be talking about the Fitnessgram and cerebral palsy, along with modifications and adaptations that you can use in your physical education classroom. I just thought it was a little interesting. I didn't know, honestly, too much about the Fitnessgram, so I did find some background information. I'm not going to read everything here, but basically, the organization that's around now has grown out of, it's called the American Alliance for Health, Physical Education, Recreation, and Dance. It was founded in 1885, and they were kind of like the forefront of physical health in America's youth. And then in 1958, the first published national fitness norms um, were given to different people. And if you see here, it includes some different skills, some that are still used today, but they had the softball throw, three aquatic tests, standing long jump, definitely some more tests in theirs. And then the Fitnessgram kind of fed off of the background information on February 23rd, 1987. Here's when a group of scientists, doctors, they got together and they looked at test methodology, manuals they could write, and how they could refine this program. But after 87, it wasn't until the 90s when Human Kinetics got a hold of this information, published it, marketed it, and sold the materials. Something I found interesting, and I guess I didn't realize it until I started doing this, was 2009, the NFL Charities partnered with Fitnessgram to give grants to 1,200 schools. Just some more information on the Fitnessgram. It helps students, parents, and teachers determine if the student meets criterion and norm-based fitness standards. And these tests kind of help lead your instruction in physical education. It can be both individual and group reports. It is scientifically based in research. I read a lot. They definitely spent time to find their norms, really dove into different types of students. It is used in all 50 states, 14 countries, 67,000 schools, and 22 million students. And that's information from their resource book from 2012. Most of the tests and batteries seemed as though they could be used across elementary, middle, and high school. The PACER test, they did kind of focus more on for elementary. Middle and high school kids, I did see videos of them using it, but they said that would be more appropriate for elementary. The mile run is not scored for K to 3. The walk test is actually just secondary. There's only data for that, but there are scores for all other age groups in the battery test. And usually, from what I gathered, it was usually tested at the beginning and end of the school year to see if there was progression or regression. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the tests. There are 3 ways that I came across for them to test Fitnessgram. One would be self-testing, where the students evaluate themselves and their results. They kind of do it independently and see what they need to do. They don't need much adult help. Then there's individualized tests, where the testing is done on a one-on-one basis, but with help from teachers, parents, and staff. At our school, that's more what they have the whole group and test the students individually. And then there's also the personal best test, and it's used to see how students perform in each test. Like, they'll do it in the spring and then try and beat their score they'll do it in the fall and try and beat their score in the spring. They're not quite as focused on getting in certain zones, but they're trying to beat their score. There are kind of 3 basic umbrellas in the Fitnessgram. The first one is the aerobic capacity, and you have the choice to do the PACER test, the mile run, or the mile walk. And then there's also the muscular strength, endurance, and flexibility, where you have the curl up, the trunk lift, the 90-degree push-up, the back saver sit and reach, or I did see that it could be either or the shoulder stretch. And then also body composition, which is BMI and weight. Within the Fitnessgram, they have 3 different zones that when the students get the scores that they could be in. There's the healthy fitness zone. Here's where students have met the healthy zone standards. And sometimes you could meet it, say, in the mile run, but might not meet that standard in the sit and reach. I know for me in school, sit and reach, and what was the other? The pull up, we had that. I didn't do too well, but the standards go for each individual test battery. The next is the needs improvement and the health risk. This means that they did not meet the healthy zone standards. And this is used for aerobic capacity battery and the body composition. It's not used for the muscular strength one. And this level of fitness is below the minimal health standards. And the effects of being in this zone could impact the student's health and well-being later in life. And basically just telling them that adjustments maybe should be made. And then needs improvement at a greater risk for chronic health conditions. And like I said at the bottom, the muscular strength, endurance, and flexibility only has the healthy fit zone and the needs improvement. It doesn't have that middle zone. We're going to first talk about the aerobic capacity battery test. We're going to go through all the different batteries, and then I have some short videos that kind of hopefully summarize it up so you can see what a typical student does with these. The aerobic capacity, and their goal for doing these testing is to get students moving 60 minutes a day. And I know that's something we struggle with my life skills kids. We do it in school, just keeping them active. And in order to find out their aerobic capacity, a formula is used to calculate aerobic capacity, or the maximum rate that oxygen can be taken in and used by the body during exercise. Now, like I said, there's 3 different choices for this battery. The pacer test, and this actually it reminded me a lot of the shuttle run. They run 20 meters to a soundtrack and getting faster, so the timing between the beeps gets shorter, so they have to keep speeding up. And the students want to see how long they can maintain the pace with the recording. This is recommended as an alternate to the mile run and can be used with elementary, middle, and young adults. Next is the 1 mile test run, basically just running a mile as fast as you can. And then they have an equation, which I didn't include. It's kind of more complex than I thought, to calculate oxygen uptake. But they have formulas, and they have a computer program that makes it very simple. And then there's the 1 mile walk test, and basically walking 1 mile as fast as possible. And then they use your heart rate to determine right after your walk of your aerobic capacity. The next section is the muscle strength, endurance, and flexibility battery. And here it looks at how muscles can exert force or torque, their strength, how they can resist fatigue, their endurance, and how students are able to move freely, flexibility. Strength, what I found for all these, the basis for doing these is later in life, lower back pain, keeping that at bay. The stronger your core is and things like that, the less likely later in life you'll have this back pain, which I thought was interesting. And this has the components, like I said, the curl up, the trunk lift, the 90-degree push up, and then either the back saver sit and reach or the shoulder stretch. And the last battery is the body composition. This looks at the components that make up an individual's weight. It's important because it gives information about how well a person can perform daily activities, and it also shows you about their own health and how their muscles are working, their skeleton, like just how your body is holding up. And what they talked about was 3 different ways to gather information. The first one was skin folds, where you use triceps and calf muscles to determine it, but it's the most effective way, but also you need the most training in order to do it correctly. The other one is the BMI, where you use height and weight to calculate the body mass index. And then the last one is the bioelectric impedance device. And this is that device that you hold out, and it kind of sends a current through your body and determines your BMI and your body, how much muscle, how much fat you have that way. So right now we're going to watch the videos. I have 4, they're pretty short. One talks about the pacer test, the curl ups, the trunk lift, and the shoulder stretch.
Strong. Maybe 2 drink. 25. Get there, both feet. Try and get too close to that, okay? Now I want you to just do it once and move, okay? Okay, switch legs, make sure you come on, Jordan. There's no more.
Okay, that was the pacer test, the push-ups, the back, and save and reach. So this next one actually will show you the curl-ups.
Taking out part of the Fitnessgram and test, which is part of our fitness test. What's going to happen before we start off? I'm going to brief you on how your starting position is going to look like. Your fingertips must be before the line, so make sure you reach down. Make sure it's not at the line, it's before the line. Good, your heels must touch. Just move your feet just a little further. Good job right there. All you're going to do is on the command up, you will reach your fingers all the way to the edge of the line. When it says down, you go all the way up. Make sure that the back of your shoulders lift up. Okay? If you have a miss or a miscue, I will signify to one of these two here. It's your partner, young lady, that's your partner, and the man is your partner. I'll just do this to you. You'll put your arm up there and signify you have one miss. Right, on the second miss, third miss, you're out. Sound good, on? Okay. Are there any questions for right now? Perfect.
We'll begin the curls. Ready? Begin. Up. Down. 1. Up. Down. 2. Up. Down. 3. Up. Down. 4. Up. Down. 5. Up.
You gotta hold it on.
Down. 6. Up. Down. 7. Up. Down. 8. Up. Down. 9. Up. Down. 10. Up. Down. 11. Up. Down. 12. Up.
All right, as you could see there, that was the curl-ups, kind of showing you with the tape on the ground and how you had to get your hands in front of it. And just take note of how these regular education students do it. And then we will, the next, as we're done here, I have to use the attached worksheet for you to think of modifications that you would do with a child with cerebral palsy for these tests. This next one here is the trunk lift.
The student being tested lies on the mat in a prone position face down, with toes pointed and hands under the thighs. A pointer marker is placed on the floor in line with the student's eyes. By maintaining a focus on a spot on the floor while lifting the trunk, the student will be better able to maintain the head in the right position. During the trunk lift, the student lifts the upper body off the floor in a very slow and controlled manner to a maximum height of 12 inches. During the movement, the student's head should remain in straight alignment with the spine. The up position is held long enough to allow the examiner to place the ruler on the floor in front or to the side of the student and determine the distance from the floor to the student's chin. Once the measurement is taken, the student returns to the starting position in a controlled manner. 2 trials are allowed on the trunk lift, with the highest score recorded for the student.
All right, that was the trunk lift, and then the last one here is the shoulder stretch.
This is brain break number 6, shoulder stretch. It's also a Fitnessgram flexibility assessment. Raise your right hand, lower your left arm. Now bring both hands behind your back and try and touch your hands behind your back. Switch, raise your left hand. Try and touch your hands behind your back.
As you can see, those were just some different of typical high school peers performing some of the Fitnessgram tests. What I would like you to do now, I'm going to talk about cerebral palsy, kind of go over some things, and then just pull out that worksheet, and I'll remind you again when to do that. So next we're going to talk about cerebral palsy and how the different, talk about what it is, and just then how it impacts students in the gym class. Cerebral palsy is an umbrella term that includes non-progressive but changing motor impairment syndromes, which stem from abnormalities of the brain that form during the early stages of development. And basically, this can happen before, during, or after birth, and it often affects muscle tone, movement, balance, coordination. Some cases, intelligence. There's no cure, and comorbidity is present in many cases. I know my one student actually has alopecia with it. She has seizure disorders, but it definitely, it usually is not just cerebral palsy. There's something else with it. And it affects the neurons in the cortical and subcortical pathways of the brain, which in turn affect movement. From when I have been learning more about CP, it's either congenital or acquired, and congenital is when the damage happens before or after birth. And this makes up most of the cases of CP. The cause is often unknown, but some causes that, or some things that have caused it, are brain abnormalities, deformities, infections, fever, intracranial hemorrhage, and asphyxia. I know the big one for a lot of the people I know was a cord getting wrapped around their neck, or they're losing oxygen at birth. And then acquired, it's caused by brain damage after 28 days of birth. So they are born typically, and then and this is often a smaller number. And this is also the biggest cause of this is traumatic brain injury, an infection or lack of blood flow to the brain, heart defect, or sickle cell. How it's diagnosed, it's not able to be diagnosed at birth, and there's really no single test. Most, though, do get diagnosed within the first year, and it's often because of primitive reflexes and motor delays. And from when I was researching this before, the most often tests that are used to help determine if it's cerebral palsy are gross motor function classification system and the manual ability classification system. Now, we kind of talked about just CP in general. There are some different subtypes that have some different characteristics. So the first one is spastic, which actually makes up the biggest percentage, 80% of all cases. Usually there are tight muscles that are hard to stretch, and it's due to damage of the cerebral cortex. And within this type of CP, there are three different subtypes, three different types of spastic. A dysplasia, which affects the legs more than the arms. The hemiplegia, and I'm sorry, I'm horrible with these words sometimes, but it's basically where half your body is affected more than the other. And the spastic quadriplegia, where this one's the most severe. These individuals can rarely walk and often goes along with a lot of other health issues. There's dyskinetic cerebral palsy, and this is the most noted characteristic of this form is uncontrolled fluctuations in muscle tone over the whole body. And this one's association with damage to the basal ganglia. And there are two types. The athetosis, where your body appears constantly in motion and the body is extremely rigid or relaxed. And the dyskinetic is repetitive, twisting, and distorted posture, and it's painful and slow to fast movements. A lot of the symptoms are tremors, you're off balance, there's some individuals have drooling, but most often typical intelligence. There's ataxic CP, and this is caused by abnormalities in the cerebellum. And some common symptoms are difficulty posturing, jerky and coordinated movements, and difficulty with fine motor. And then from all those types, sometimes, and I think a lot of times they kind of fit into different categories. So there's also a mixed type CP, and this is characterized by symptoms that don't fit into any other category. It's often too tight or loose muscle tone, and its causes are due to damage in multiple parts of the brain. So at this point, I'd like you to pause the video, and kind of look on the worksheet. I spelled out each test in the Fitnessgram. I want you to spend some time to just list a few modifications that you think would help someone with CP perform these tests. And keep in mind, like, I know some students with CP who are fairly typical walking, who can get around, who are very kind of independent, and then I have kiddos or I know kiddos, and actually the kiddo I always think about is she's in a wheelchair and she has where half of her body, it definitely is a lot more tense than the other. So you definitely want to keep in mind for the ranges of some of these students, because it really can impact how a lot of them with just movement for these tests. So, okay, after pausing it, I'm going to go through some different modifications and adaptations, and I took each test and kind of broke it down into each part. And then I'll kind of, as I'm going through, talk about what I found, or if I think for some of my kiddos, what would work. So for body composition, for weight, if it is hard to weigh them if they're in a wheelchair, you can get the most recent weight from the nurse, or call the doctor or parent, or if you have contact, the nurse can get information, or even you, to gather the most recent weight. But also too, and depending on what type of scale you have, you could weigh the wheelchair and then put the student in the wheelchair to find their weight. And another thing too is if they are able to stand a little more, that you can weigh yourself and then set it to 0 and help hold the student up. I know with my student, we actually did that, where you weigh yourself and then hold them, because she just couldn't stand still long enough to get a good weight. Height, I found this one out, and I thought this was kind of interesting, to have them lay down on the mat and be assisted, stretch them out, and gather the most accurate data. I actually like that idea, especially for one of my kiddos. And then if they are in a wheelchair and not able to get out, you can measure their upper and lower extremities, kind of measure them sitting down, so you can at least get a number that way. For aerobic activity, I broke it up into the pacer and then the mile, run, and walk. For the pacer, as you know, you have the cadences and the beeps. Modify how the students follow the cadences. Measure the distance the student goes, and they don't have to keep up with the cadence, like how many laps they do, like they don't follow the beeps. And I saw there was talk in there of even shortening the running field, if that would help the student. Have students run one length, then walk the other. And I thought this was, my one student probably could do this. She used to walk with a crutch. They could use a walker or wheelchair and push it to have that stability, and if needed, to assist with the walking and running, or some might even just need a partner or an arm to kind of lean on to do that. I thought those are pretty good. So the mile, walk, and run, kind of the same thing. I know for our gym class, we go out to the track, so they usually try and walk or run as fast as they can the long parts of the track, and then they'll walk the bends in the track. Have, again, for the mile, walk, or run, have the students push a wheelchair, use crutches, a walker to complete the battery, and have maybe someone there to assist them with walking. And our student, she probably had not been able to do a mile, so they can walk on a treadmill and calculate heart rate. And what we did was, all year we tried to increase her time on the treadmill. I think we started at like 6 minutes and get her up to 12. And at the end, she's working hard. She's sweating, but it was a good way to improve some of that aerobic activity. We kept track of the minutes. I did this more with PT than in the gym class, but we did the walking. But even just adding in a heart rate monitor and, keeping her going with that way. And what we did, I put next, she could walk on a treadmill and be assisted by an adult to keep pace. She had a belt that we put around her waist, and we held on it behind her and kind of stood to keep her from falling. But it was a good way for her to do that aerobic activity. And as I said, use a heart rate monitor to gather data. So now we're going to go into the muscular strength, endurance, and flexibility. So for the push-ups, some things I thought of, or things I've seen, or what my OT had seen, or I've seen her do when I observed her the one time. Students could do push-ups against the wall, and again, too, you could put the belt on them for some added security, just to give them that if they're kind of wobbly. Then some could do it on a step, or like a lower structure, and then the floor, depending on their level of severity. They could do modified push-ups with knees on the floor. That's another one, if they're stable enough, if that part of their body is not affected as much. Another one that that our student actually did was she pushed herself up using the armrest to kind of get that motion going and to kind of give her arms a workout. That was difficult for her because her one arm was very rigid, but we did try and work on that. Have a preset goal that beginning of the year you maybe do 5, then you do 10, then you do 20. And then you could also have an individual helper or spotter, like I said, to help them do the movements correctly. And again, that the 90-degree push-up has a cadence. They don't have to follow it. They just do as many as they can until they're done. And they could also do, if they're more severe, do arm presses off a helper to mimic the push-up motion. And I thought of this. I don't know. You'll have to share your thoughts. The TRX bands, we had them. They could also do that. I mean, it might be too unstable. I'm thinking with the CP, but if it's not too bad, it might just, they're not on the floor, then it might give them another option. The curl up, again, students don't follow the cadence. They just do it to their own pace to when they can't do anymore. For students in a real wheelchair, they can reach forward to touch an object and raise their arms up. They could also just use the legs if the upper body is more impacted, alternate legs instead of lifting their upper body. And they can also put their hands on their thighs and curl up part way so they don't have to come up as far. Have someone hold feet to give them more stability. We do that a lot with our kiddos. That does help. Have students just come minimally off floor, just kind of like a crunch, and then assistance with pulling student up if needed. The next was the trunk lift, where you can hold the student's feet to give them extra assistance. The students can push up with their hands or put arms under their shoulders to help push up, just to kind of see what their range of motion is with their back. There's also assistance with holding on to arms, like they can just to help steady themselves, or don't just do the minimal, like don't overstress them. See how decrease the level that they have to lift themselves off the ground. The back saver sit and reach. This one, if they're in a wheelchair, put the box on their wheelchair board and have them lean forward as much as they can to reach the target. They can also lean forward using one arm. I thought of that. Or they can allow students to hold for shorter period, like they don't have to hold it as long as typical peers. Have a predetermined distance for the student to reach so they're not stressing out about it. They could bend their knees or turn their knees outward to help them reach their goal. And another one was have students sit against a wall or in their wheelchair and measure their lean forward. Or another one that I did find this one online, was standing toe touch with or without supports. They bend down and touch their toes, and then you measure the distance that way. The shoulder stretch, and this one I had a tough time with because it said you can pick the sit and reach or this one, kind of they do the same, they measure the same thing. So I'd be curious of what modifications I read. I had a hard time with this one because I just think an individual CP just to do that movement would be I have a hard time doing it, always have. Just doing one arm, like if their one arm is worse than the other. I know our student, like I said, her one arm was very rigid. Just do the other arm. But I really think that would be difficult for her to even bend her arms that way. Or just use light adult assistance to help them get in the correct position. And like I said down there, I feel that this one's the hardest to find some modifications for. So basically that sums up my presentation. Most of my information came from the Fitnessgram. They had a reference guide, which I thought was actually helpful. It gave you all the background, all the information. But, and then I also did talk to our physical therapist. She has a lot of information for our kiddos. But that is my presentation on cerebral palsy and the Fitnessgram. Thank you.